The Lawyer Show. How's everybody doing today? I'm Jeremy Rosenthal. I'm with Vanita Parker, and today we are your lawyers. And so let me tell you a little bit about The Lawyer Show if this is your first time joining us. You ever know how at your workplace you might have water cooler talk? When I was, another lifetime ago, I was a waiter at the Black Eyed Pea and at Chili's, and we would hang out in the back and we'd kind of talk about things. You know, we'd talk about the cooks, or we'd talk about the customers.
Or the cute girls.
The hostesses, how they were doing their jobs. And that's what The Lawyer Show is. This is your chance to watch lawyers interact and talk about lawyer things. And today, my guest is Vanita Parker, and Vanita is a very special guest for many reasons, which you're about to learn about, but also she works at America's favorite criminal defense law firm, Rosenthal S1E6. And so today's topic is going to be mental health and the role that it plays in criminal law, which is kind of a big one. So anyway, I'm going to let Vanita start talking, and my whole goal today is to try to get Vanita to laugh at a certain level really hard. That wasn't it, and you'll see why if we can accomplish that. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and let Vanita introduce herself and talk a little bit about her practice.
Well, good afternoon. I am Vanita Parker. I've been practicing law for 23 years. I was an assistant district attorney in Dallas County for almost 12 years and have done defense since 2009. So the balance of that, 11 some years of being a defense attorney. And I practice Collin County and Dallas County. It's kind of where I keep most of my practice. And, this topic's on mental health and mental illness. Back in 2007, late 2007, early 2008, I was the sole person that started the mental health division at the Dallas County District Attorney's Office. And I ran that division until I left in March of 2009 at the DA's office, and I concentrate on working on mental illness cases as a criminal defense attorney. I do all kinds of cases. It doesn't have to be mental illness, but if you do have a client has a mental illness, I do focus on that as well.
Well, let's talk a bit about how mental illness intersects with criminal law. And I think one of the big misconceptions that I see from people, from folks, is that mental illness, the term mental illness has, I think, an unfair connotation. People think of mental illness and they think of the courts, and instantly in their mind they're thinking of, Jason being psychotic with his machete, right? They think of people who talk to themselves. They think of homeless people who probably do have some more severe types of mental illness. But in reality, aren't we talking a lot about just sort of everyday type things? Anxiety, depression.
That's right.
Manic episodes. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, there are three big diagnoses. They call them the big three. That's bipolar, schizophrenia, and oh my God, I just drew a blank. And major depressive disorder. PTSD is also a is a mental illness, but it's not one of the big three, but it is close. In basically most recent times, and the DSM is the book that classifies mental illness, and that's kind of like the Bible for mental illness. So you've got the big three, but you've also got, individuals that do have ADHD, autism, and a lot of the other illnesses that you don't think. And you mentioned anxiety, mm-hmm. and those things all fall into mental illness. So it's not just an individual having a psychotic episode that you think about when you think of mental illness.
Right. And I think the way that I try to explain this to my clients as well, and their families, because a lot of times if you had, if somebody's got cancer, they're going to present in a medical fashion with symptoms, right? If somebody has got the flu or coronavirus, they're going to have symptoms that we can hope, in many instances see, and then there's a reason for that diagnosis. There's no way, and a lot of times, to diagnose mental illness unless or until somebody's in jail, because that's the symptom, right? The symptom is the behavior. And the way that I like to describe it to my clients is that everybody falls within a particular range of behavior. And when you have anxiety and depression, your range is out here. And to some degree, if you've got a mental illness or anything that causes you to go beyond that, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I feel like I'm going to break the law today. I really feel like I want to go to jail. But in reality, what's happening is, somebody's behavior is affected to such a degree that they're getting in trouble. So it doesn't have to be necessarily like being in a straitjacket.
Right, exactly. And it can start just with things that are odd and just not normal. And sometimes people, start out their diagnosis and find out when they just start doing stuff that's erratic that they don't normally do. With depression, individuals can sometimes break down and just start crying, or, they have the highs like bipolar. You're starting and you laugh out loud and you don't know why you're laughing. There are those that's sometimes how they find them. They just, they get mad, they get frustrated, and they eventually find out that sometimes it doesn't have to be a criminal offense that an individual commits, but it can start as early as that. It just depends on whether there is the family support and you have someone that's there watching and knowing you. And a lot of times with some of these criminal cases, individuals don't have that family support.
Yeah, right. Take me back to the Dallas County DA's office and talk about the need for the mental health division, why it got started, and how its genesis.
Okay. The mental illness division that I started back in late 2007 is when it kind of started developing and went into action in 2008. We saw the need for the increasing numbers of individuals and cases of mental illness. It has since the numbers have risen and we see it. It's more accepted now. It's more an acceptance than people talk, about behind closed doors. If you have cancer, people talk about it. And now I think we need to open up the dialogue and say, if you do have a mental illness, it's something to talk about and it's not something to be ashamed about.
Mm-hmm. And so as a prosecutor, talk to me, because one of the, and another part of the lawyer show is me talking over everybody a lot. And Vanita was a good sport to come on today, and very, very honored and very thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you.
Well, I'm just trying to get you to laugh.
You want me to snort, and I'm not
going
to. That's where you're trying to go.
Look, I'm trying to keep the viewers
say something.
tuned. Well, that's all I have to do is say something funny, and that's
Exactly.
the challenge because I'm not good at that either. So one of the things that I've always kind of thought when it comes to mental illness, because as you know, and your practice is split. It sounds pretty much evenly, close to 12 years as a prosecutor, and now coming on that as on the defense side. I mean, from my perspective, we get the families that come in. Right, we get mom and dad and aunt and uncle and husband and wife that come in who live with this every day. They live with their loved one who's got something kind of going on. And so another way to think about it is, and as a prosecutor, right, I was used to when I for the time that I was, you would get somebody who would come in and you're dealing with the store owner who got stolen from. Right, you're dealing
Correct.
with the person who got assaulted. You're dealing with sometimes the person whose house got broken into, and you're seeking justice for them. But you're not hearing all the you're not hearing why this person is doing what they're doing.
Exactly.
We get to hear that, So that to me is what's kind of interesting about one of the things about that was interesting to me about you're starting the Dallas County Mental Health Division is because you did it as a prosecutor.
I did, and
So-
it was eye-opening. It was, a lot of times people think, a lot of times people think of prosecutors and having no heart and, only
Well, they are
wanting-
lawyers.
Touche. They want, they just want to seek the person. They want to see the person in jail. That's their job, is what people think, and it's not. It's to seek justice. And as a prosecutor, when I started this division, it opened my eyes, and it helped me actually transition to be a defense attorney. And I think I do a good job at that. And it opens, and you realize that there's so much more that you don't know. And then once you get in, like when I got into the position of the prosecutor and the chief of the mental health division, it made me realize that, there is more to a case, and that there is stuff that is mitigating that an individual does go through, and it's not black and white as you sometimes see it. And you've got to take the whole thing as a package and determine it. And sometimes individuals are faking it, and it is something you've got to pick out. What someone's faking or malingering is what a lot of times the psychologists, psychiatrists use. Is malingering.
Tell by the way, you're watching JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can see JP, Kathy, and the Crew 7:30 to 9, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You're watching The Lawyer Show. We're on every Thursday from noon to 1. Tell JP, Kathy, and the Crew Nation what malingering is.
Malingering is an individual, it's a medical term, just basically when someone's faking it and they're trying to think that if I have mental illness, I might get a better deal. And a lot of individuals come into jail thinking if I say I was crazy or I have a mental illness, that I might not be punished as severely as an individual that doesn't have one. And that's not necessarily the case at all. When individuals come into, I'll use the Collin County Jail as an example, they get what's called a mental health assessment if they have an indication that there is a mental illness. And a lot of the mental health assessment is self-reporting. So they do talk about hospitalizations, medications they take, and different services that they've had in the community. But if they're an attorney, I go in and I meet with them, and I think there's just not something right. Besides, before going through other processes that attorneys do, competency, et cetera, I will have a psychiatric evaluation of that individual, and I'll have a doctor come in and see if I'm really dealing with someone that does have a mental illness or not.
Yeah, and was there a particular case that you dealt with as a prosecutor, or a particular situation where you thought, man, we're just coming up short here, and we really need to have some better answers and better solutions? Was there anything specifically that you remember?
Well, there was a case, actually, and she's actually been released from the supervision of the courts, and I like to call her my client, my poster child of dealing with this. It's a mental illness of schizophrenia. I represented a client that was accused back in, I believe, 2008 of throwing her kids and basically throwing off her kids off I-30 in Jim Miller.
Well, you say that with such a big smile on your face.
That is not... The incident itself was horrific.
Obviously, yes.
She had just gotten released from a mental hospital. Her father had told the hospital not to release her, but the hospital did release her, and she wasn't ready to be released.
Right.
And she jumped off her kids were thrown off the bridge. And
they made it.
They survived.
Okay. I've heard this story before.
Yes.
So I know that there's, I don't want to seem glib about it. Because you were smiling at the result that ultimately happened.
I am exactly smiling at that.
Okay.
I am not.
No. Of course, this is horror. No, this is just no. It's and one of the things too, and this is a bit of another topic, and we won't go quite there, at least not yet. But I mean, one of the things is as a lawyer, I mean, if people hung around our office for any degree of time, I mean, we deal with such extreme behavior issues, not the least of which is related to mental illness, but we deal with such extreme situations that if you don't have a dark sense of humor, if you can't read the newspaper about some horrible thing that happened and then just get angry that some other lawyer got the case,
Right. Well, unfortunately, we become kind of jaded.
A touch.
Yes.
A touch. Anyway, so so she wasn't ready to be released, had this horrific incident.
Yes, and as well as herself jumping off the bridge.
Okay.
Because demons were following her, and God told her to do that. So she did and went through being in the hospital, arrested. She spent over a year and a half to 2 years in the state hospital, getting back on medications before she went to trial.
Probably CPS came in and...
She's no longer has custody of her children. They were taken away from her. And she actually does not have, I mean, she doesn't even see her children to this day.
Okay.
And yeah.
Is that and I ask because I don't know, is that well, and I guess it's really neither here nor there whether it's her choice or if it's court ordered.
I believe it was court ordered.
Okay.
Not to have any contact with them.
I see.
I think once they turn 18, they're adults and they can have contact with their mom. Not that she doesn't want to see them, and I know that for a fact. She would like to see them eventually one day. But she has now been released from the supervision of the court, and there was a long years of working on getting her medicated and getting her services through MetroCare Dallas. Was the services we used, mental health services for, and she was deemed indigent at the time. And so we went through the whole process. She learned how to balance a checkbook. She'd never done something of that nature. We basically taught her everyday life skills of what needed to happen, how to rent an apartment, how to buy furniture for that apartment.
And mental illness too, this is a severe case, the one that you were
exactly.
the one that you're talking about. But if you think about it, really, if you just really try to wrap your mind around for a second, what could possibly be so powerful in a person's mind that could make them do such a horrific thing, not only to children, but to themselves. How powerful that voice in her own mind must have been, coupled with probably a very, an insufficient coping mechanism to be able to turn that off. But that shows everybody just kind of what you're dealing with, because again, even if you are in that mind frame, you still know right from wrong. But whatever's going on with you is just so overpowering.
Right. And that was her situation. She was determined to be insane at the time. And, people agree with that or don't agree with insanity as, you can go through with, there's other, female cases, the Darlie Routier, we can go down a whole road of cases. But it is something that is real. And I've seen it basically from the inception of her case to the end, where years later, over 10 years later, actually maybe even 15 years later, where she is now and how she's just evolved and developed and has done good. And that's why I called her my poster child of schizophrenia.
Well, yeah. So, and again, that being kind of an extreme example.
Exactly.
I do the, another part of the lawyer show is that I talk a lot about myself and my accomplishments and how many push-ups I can do.
How many can you do?
Not enough. But what happens is, you know, I do the. You threw me off there. I do the Twitter feed for Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, and I do part of it. They do a lot of it. If there's ever a smart ass remark or anybody is about to get in a fist fight, it's probably me. One of the things I did.
Okay, now I might snort.
Okay.
Sorry.
We came close.
We did.
We came close.
We did.
We're not done. We got some time left on this show. There's still hope. But you know, one of the I did a Twitter poll probably about a year ago, and I asked the question: what percentage of your cases amongst criminal defense lawyers would you consider mental illness to take a part of? And I think you know, Twitter only lets you do so much, between 0 and 25%, 0 and 50, or 25 and 50, you know, 50 and 75, and 75 and 100. The most common answer was between 50 and 75%. And that's where I voted as well. But again, keeping in mind that, you know, I mean, it doesn't, we have, and so the viewers know, we have legal standards for some of this, and we're going to get into that in a minute. There's what we call competency issues, which deal with a person's ability to understand what's going on. We also have what we would characterize as, and what you described as, potentially not guilty by reason of insanity.
Correct.
But beyond that, I mean, you know, I've had clients who've never had a misstep of their life, but when they're in their early 50s, our physiology changes, their chemistry changes, maybe there's hereditary issues in the family, and because mom or dad was mean to them when they were 7 or 8 and always loved the other kid more, they go shoplifting at the age of 52 or 53. And so I would characterize that as mental illness, although it's clearly not somebody who fits in the category of where you were, of your we'll call them poster.
My posters.
Your you know, of your client, it wouldn't fit in that category. But when you define it broadly, I think it's that pervasive. I think that, again, I just always go back to, nobody wakes up, not many people wake up in the morning and think, man, I'm going to throw my life away today.
No, and I agree. And it could start out as in a 50-year-old. Those are extreme cases, because usually you find mental illness affecting individuals when they're young adults, like when they are about to leave adolescence, like when they're 18. A lot of times you see males. That's when it does affect them with regards to schizophrenia. I would say 18 to 30 would be, it's kind of a vast range, but you can see the diagnosis with regards to that hit males at that time. And females, they kind of don't have, I don't know necessarily.
Are you saying females are more sane than men?
We are. Yes.
Well, that a
and
given.
I am more sane because I work with lots of men at the Jeremy Rosenthal Calabastarian. It is men, and
well, there's a difference between toughness and which you certainly are, and you have to be. Yeah, no, you're. Oh yes, there's that. So let's take the audience. Oh, you're listening to JP, Kathy, and the Crew Network. You can hear JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You're watching The Lawyer Show. We are your lawyers today. You can watch us between noon and 1 on Thursdays on Facebook Live. So let's talk about and maybe take our audience through some of the, because we're talking a lot about mental illness and kind of how they intersect, but we haven't talked a lot about what the courts necessarily do about it. So talk to the audience, if you would, about competency, what that means, and then maybe, not guilty by reason of insanity. This is going to be a test. I'm glad you're writing this down finally. But yeah, so talk about that, and then, and then there's all sorts of other stuff we can get into, but let's just start there.
Okay. Well, we could start with an individual that gets arrested. And once they get arrested, they can immediately bond out when a bond is set on a case. And if an individual is not able to make bond, there is something out of the Code of Criminal Procedure called it's 17.032. It's a mental health bond. There are certain crimes that are going to be automatically not eligible for a 17.032 mental health bond. But that says in the code that a judge shall grant a bond in those cases. But there are requirements. You can't have something assaultive in your criminal history.
And when you say bond, that's a PR bond, or what we call personal recognizance bond.
Correct.
Which means that it's free, that they don't have to pay anything, but the judge gives them 18. I say 18, but the judge gives them a whole bunch of things that they have to do, or they go back to jail.
Correct. There's lots of bond conditions I was going to talk about.
Sorry, I knew it. I knew it. Well, the JP Kathy and the crew, their JP Kathy and the crew network likes free things, or so I'm told. So but you get the personal recognizance bond.
Correct.
And then talk about some of the conditions. I'm sorry I cut you off.
That's okay. I'll let it slide this time.
Well.
There are conditions, and a lot of times I deal with clients, and I'm like, either you can pay for your bond and be gone, and until your case gets filed, or you can get a mental health bond, and there are conditions of seeing a mental health provider, making sure you're medicine compliant, which we can talk about medicine compliant and those issues. Random urinalysis while you're out on bond. There are sometimes drug treatment, AANA, that they have to go to. You might make them take a class while they're out on bond. It's almost like you're taking probation as that. And you check in with the judge once a month and you call weekly instead of every day or once a week to a bonding company. You call the mental health office at the Collin County Courthouse and you check in.
And Collin County does, they've come a long way, and they actually will. They've got personnel who work for the courts.
Correct.
That help facilitate even details on down to this person needs a ride to get somewhere.
Correct.
Every Wednesday, and as far as you were going to talk about medications. Talk about that for a sec, if you don't mind.
Well, medications, they will get medications when they're in the jail. They may not get the exact prescribed medications that they're used to getting. So there is that little loophole. Some medications that a doctor prescribes in what's called the free world when you're not in jail are not the same medications that the jail can prescribe, depending on the potency and whether it's classified as a certain drug or not, and whether the the courts or the jails dispense that medication.
And addiction, and this is a separate topic, but it's kind of a salt and pepper. It kind of goes hand in hand with mental illness, I find, and I'm sure you do as well.
Yes.
People self-treat, they self-diagnose, they self-medicate. That's why drugs are such a really problem issue when it comes to mental health.
Yes, you will. Actually, that's a really good transition question, because mental health, individuals that have a diagnosis of mental health, they were probably, let's say their diagnosis is ADHD, and they were given Adderall or Vyvanse as a kid growing up, and when they get to be an adult and they're now on their own insurance, or they don't have insurance and they're adults and they're living on their own, they self-medicate. And I see that day in, day out. Individuals that have picked up a methamphetamine case and they got arrested, and whether it be just a state jail amount or a small amount or a marijuana case, they do anything that they can that makes them feel better.
Right.
Sometimes a lot of our clients that have a mental illness don't want to take their prescribed medications because they don't like the way it makes them feel.
Mm-hmm. And when we go back to that, we also have to remember too, people have a hard time diagnosing themselves. It's one thing to self-medicate, but that doesn't necessarily follow a self-diagnosis. In other words, you may have somebody who just likes to smoke weed because it chills them out. And they've not gone through that analysis that, okay, well, there's a legal way to do this and a safer way to do this and a more constructive way to do this. But they get into, and I use marijuana as an example here, but they get into some kind of gateway drug, whether it, which could even be an opioid or something like that, and off they go.
Right. And, and I tell my clients, not everyone likes to take medication. I take medication, not necessarily for mental illness every day, but I do take medications. And, I don't want to have to take medications, but I do. No one likes tax day, April 15th, but we pay our taxes.
And October 15th if you filed a 6-month extension.
But, like I said, and that's one of the conversations I have with clients is, you've got to stay on your medication. And a lot of times they're like, well, I don't like the way it makes me feel. And I'm like, well, you take it one day. Why don't we try taking it 7 days? Or why don't we try a few days at a time and see how that makes you feel? And they're like, well, I guess I could. And I go, and I could be personal. And I've had cancer before, and I didn't like taking medication when I had that. And I did, and I use that with my clients. Sometimes I just keep it real. I had that diagnosis, and I took care of stuff, and didn't want to have to take medication, but I did.
And a lot of this turns on the stigma of I can tough this out. That I come from. My dad was strong. I was raised to deal with my own problems. I understand, Vanita, if you were sick and you had cancer, well, of course you're going to take medication. But we're talking about mental illness, and I just don't believe in that.
Right.
There's a lot of people we deal with that. We deal with that with a lot of our clients, and that's some of the reluctance to be medicated.
Correct. I mean, and it's the stigma, and it's something that needs to change because it's like any other illness. Mental illness is here. It's not going to go away. It's not like, oh, we've got, let's bring it on. It's just, it's part of our society. And, a lot of
times. And the pandemic has done very little to help that, but keep going. Yeah.
That's true. And technology, I think, has helped with some of that with our children. With ADHD, just watching, pacifying them by sticking an iPad in front of them while the parents go have dinner. We can start with that. I think just the sheer amount of times the screen changes and lets them watch TV or, movies, that it's leading to our children and their mental illness that they are going to have to deal with when they're later on in years. And I might be a big, that's something. I can't say I was one to put an iPad in front of my child, but she does have an iPhone and she does play with it. So I'm not.
And apparently it can be done so long for an entire time for you guys to go out and have dinner.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know it could be done for. Well, no, I've got a daughter as well, and yeah, definitely an issue these days. Okay, what's competency?
Competency. Sorry, that was an issue
I think we talked about. Yeah, maybe about 15. It's okay.
Well, competency is under Chapter 46B of the Penal Code, and it talks about. I talk about all the push-ups I can do and all the war stories. You're like citing the code. It's like you're a lawyer. I know, and you're talking about push-ups. How many again could you do?
Yeah, we're going to change the topic on that again.
See, he keeps skirting the issue.
Okay, chapter 46B.
It's
46B. You see how I threw that in the B?
I told you B.
You didn't say B.
I did.
We can rewind the tape. You said chapter 46.
I said B, and C is for insanity.
Okay, keep going. Competency.
It's whether or not you have. It's basically defined whether you have a rational understanding of the proceedings that are going on, whether you know who the players are, A lot of times people meet with individuals and they think their client's not competent, but their client can still answer the questions that are needed for legal competency. Legal competency is whether you understand the role the prosecutor plays, the judge plays, the defense attorney, and what a jury would do. It's the threshold is very low when it comes to competency. It's whether or not you can have a rational understanding of the surroundings of what's going on, if you can deal with your attorney and explain and have a defense or talk to him about the facts and circumstances surrounding a case. So the threshold is low, but a lot of times we will get an individual evaluated because there are some other issues, because you're like, well, we can deal with an issue, but they never stay on topic, and they,
right. And that
go off topic.
That goes to their ability to communicate with counsel.
Correct.
And assist in their own defense. And that can actually be probably my experience. You can talk for yourself. I mean, yes, you're going to get those people who are, the CIA is talking to them in their jail cell and they're in some top secret, capacity. You're going to get those types of folks, but you're also going to get the ones who you can't get a word in edgewise, almost like the lawyer show. And so what happens is when you try to have a conversation with a client and you try to ask them, okay, what happened? Tell me what happened. And they answer your question for about 2 seconds, and then they're off into the weeds, or they're off somewhere else. And it's perpetual to the point where you spend an hour not getting anywhere with them.
And they can't assist you because
Right.
they can't keep on one thought, because they have racing thoughts going throughout. And so those individuals do need to get evaluated. And once they're evaluated, they do come back. If they are found incompetent, they will wait usually to go to a state hospital. The code has now allowed for us to do what's called OCR, or outpatient competency restoration. That does happen for certain cases. Usually you'll find it for lower offense cases like misdemeanors. It has happened on some felonies, like low-level drug cases and cases of that nature. But with regards to a sexual assault or a theft or robbery or something like that, usually those individuals are, sent to the state hospital.
And this is a good point too, that I think just from a lawyer standpoint, from our standpoint, here's a really, really hard situation that we get put into a lot, because our job is to defend our client. Our job is to get our client through the situation. Our job is to do the best we can do for the client. And not only that, we're business people too. We're getting paid by the client to help them with this problem. And then when there's an avenue that has to be followed, like competency, you're telling the client, time out. Okay, I'm going to have you potentially sent to a state hospital because I don't think I don't think things are right up there.
Right.
And so we're in a really tough position, because on one end, if we don't do that, then we're frankly not doing our jobs. And what could happen is, let's take a client who's charged. Let's make it something bad, right? Let's say a client's, because there's so many great things you can be charged with, but let's make it a felony. Let's say that it's sexual assault, right? And let's say you have a client who you question their competency. This client expects to go back to their job at their top 5 accounting firm every week, but you're doing your best. If you lose that case and that client has to register as a sex offender for life, or they go to prison, it's your fault.
Right.
And if the client wasn't competent and you still pushed it to trial, it's your fault. But pre-trial, you have this dynamic where, well, hold on, we still have to get you checked out. We have to make sure this is fine, because I'm putting my license on the line, frankly,
Right.
to push this thing to trial just to keep you happy. It can be a real issue sometimes.
It does. It does throw a snafu in it, especially with the waits to go to a state hospital. We don't have that many state hospitals. And depending on the kind of case it is, if it's a sexual assault, that individual would go to the Vernon State Hospital. And the wait to go there could take anywhere up to 9 months to a year. Right now, I mean, especially with the pandemic and people the jails not accepting people or taking people to certain hospitals and keeping them in local jails. So
and
that's also another problem.
If you're court appointed on a case like this, if they're dealing with a court appointed attorney and that attorney says, well, we need to get you checked out. And, oh, by the way, if this all goes a certain direction, you could go to a state hospital. That really turns that dynamic on its head just the same, because then the person doesn't trust their lawyer, doesn't want to help their lawyer, and you just work for the government. Right. You're just one of them. And so it can be a real headache for us as well.
It is. It sometimes, and it's bad that we don't, in the state of Texas, have the resources or have mental health programs out there. And, in the state, Texas is actually 49th of all the states that have resources for mental illness, because Texas doesn't have mental illness. And so
is that because we're tough here?
Exactly. We're all Jeremy Rosenthal tough that can do lots of push-ups. We don't have the funding to have the resources available. There are resources, but they're very limited in Texas. Maybe one day there will be some resources available and hospitals open up and, for individuals that do need to go to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. I think Collin County does an okay job. And I think they've done,
Collin County in itself has done.
I think they do a lot better than they had, and I think we do better here than other counties around us.
Yes and no.
Okay.
Collin County itself does a great job with regards to the people running things and how things work. But I'm talking about with regards to mental illness in and of itself. We have one provider, which is LifePath Systems, and LifePath does a great job helping individuals. But we have no homeless in Collin County, because Collin County doesn't have homeless shelters. There is the Samaritan Inn, and but that's about it. And a lot of times, if there are individuals that have had hard times and have to find a homeless shelter to go to because a case has lost their job and a husband or wife has left them because of this mental illness, they've got to find housing. Well, Collin County doesn't have housing, and that's why I smirked.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the courthouse, because the courthouse and everything to do with resources, there's great help in Collin County. But a lot of times you have to go to Dallas to go to those homeless shelters and find places to stay.
Good infrastructure and resources at the top, not so much everywhere else.
Yeah. I mean, there are resources, but it starts dwindling.
Yeah. And kind of going back to one of the original thing, or to one of the things that we were talking about at the beginning, one of the biggest frustrations I've had is, again, in dealing with prosecutors who, and if you think I know everything now, you should have known me when I was a prosecutor in my 20s. I really knew everything then. And
I don't think that now either.
And again, yeah, and there's really no reason to. But you've got a lot of good friends who are prosecutors. I've got a lot of good friends who are prosecutors, and the vast majority of them are very hardworking, very well intentioned. But again, unless or until you've had the family crying at your office, you don't tend to understand the depths of the issue. There was a lawyer I know who used to kind of halfway joke. I mean, it's, obviously sarcasm, but, they used to say, the 6 a.m. yoga class just isn't going to work, and talking about a client who was abused or neglected or potentially molested themselves as a child, who grows up gets into drugs, has all types of mental issues, cuts themselves, and then gets in criminal trouble on their own. You got to have a deeper understanding, and it's really, really hard when you're a prosecutor. It's really hard to see that firsthand and to get that experience firsthand.
It is hard. And like I said earlier, with regards to starting the mental health division in Dallas, it opened up my eyes because I didn't see it as a prosecutor when I first started. It was something that there are a few prosecutors that currently now in Collin County as well as in Dallas that have gone back, that were defense attorneys that have gone back. Actually, not so much in Collin, but in Dallas under the DA in Dallas, John Crusoe, there are quite a few ex-prosecutors that are back working, and so they've kind of seen both sides and are able to see the big picture. Because a lot of times it's hard to make, because usually prosecutors start out, that's their first job out of law school, and they haven't switched sides. And they haven't seen the other side of it. And eventually one day they will, and maybe they will realize that, oh, this was something that, Vanita or Mr. Rosenthal or Jeremy was talking about. And, oh, I see
I think they talk about us in 4-letter terms. I don't think they call us by our first.
That's your speak back yourself.
Well, I don't even think I'm that important enough to them. But, with, I'm quick to blame prosecutors for anything and everything, but this is, I'm sure there's a lot watching our show.
Not.
But in reality, this is something that this is one of those things is a frustration that I can't, it's just not their fault. I mean, again, they're in there dealing with now, and the police, one interesting thing about mental illness is I think police and prosecutors have probably a very, very different experience when it comes to mental illness, because I think the police are out there every day dealing with it. But what they're doing is they're putting out the fire.
Right.
So
and a lot of officers now have gone through what's called CIT training, which is crisis intervention training. And I think it's starting to go where they require it. And I know in lieu of what's been going on now recently with regards to protests, et cetera.
De-escalation.
Right. They want to de-escalate the situation. Most police agencies require their officers to go through the CIT training. Mm-hmm. And so, I think it's something that definitely they should go through the training. And if they haven't already, they need to sign up for it and get refresher courses of it, because just because you went to it 20 years ago doesn't mean that you're going to be up and abreast of what's going on today. Right.
And again, it's a really hard job that they have. We've got JP, Kathy, and the Crew Nation has asked a question. Why is there only one homeless shelter in Collin County? I was going to make a fabulous point. I forgot what it was. Why is there only one homeless shelter in Collin County?
Well, that might be a question for our county commissioners. Mm-hmm. We might want to start with the top. I don't know. There are food pantries in Collin County. There's Minnie's Food Pantry. There's Allen Community Outreach, and now it's called All Community Outreach. And then there is Samaritan Inn. But Samaritan Inn is pretty selective on individuals that they allow in. We are thankful we do have the Samaritan Inn, so I'm not talking bad, but it is very hard sometimes to get clients a bed at Samaritan Inn.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about what improvements that you've seen made, say in the last 10 years, and then let's talk about what improvements you think that can be made. And before you do that, you're watching JP and Kathy and the Crew Network, and you can watch JP, Kathy, and the Crew between 7:30 and 9, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. You're watching The Lawyer Show, and we're on between noon and 1 on Thursdays. Do you remember the question?
No.
Sorry,
No.
I don't either.
Funding. I would say funding is where we need to go. We need funding to help with resources. Things that have gotten better in the last 10 years is people now understand it's not so much of a stigma as it used to be. In general, Collin County, the resources are kind of where they've been. But we do have a jail, and the individuals that work at the jail have been great to work with individuals and helping you with individuals that are in jail. The infirmary, the nurses, the doctors, they've been great support in helping clients and family members that call the jail with regards to, we need to get our son or daughter or husband or wife, the medication that they do have or need or that are prescribed. So we do have that, but again, it's the funding and getting places that are out there, because LifePath Systems, their funding is limited as well. And like all of these places, whether it be, and these are just free services and individuals can get, because I do know that the show loves free services. And so that would be something with regards to, so LifePath is there for Collin County, and in Dallas County, it would be MetroCare Services as well as ADAPT. Some of the other agencies that were out there, I think, have now merged with MetroCare and ADAPT and are no longer out there. So there are bigger services. I was wanting to get, and I forgot to get, the crisis number if you are in crisis, and I can probably look that up.
We can probably, we have Heidi from our office who's here, who's mortified by being mentioned by name.
And she's amazing.
She is that. And she could probably hit the Google button and then throw that in the comment section, and so everybody can see that.
Wanted to make sure there was like a 1-800 number if there's someone in crisis. And a lot of times individuals, we have cases that they call 911 thinking that they're going to be sending their loved one to the hospital, but end up later finding out that there was a case filed on their son or daughter or husband or wife. And I know you've had cases like that as well as I. And it is something that the individual is getting the help that they need at that point in time, that they're dealing with. But a lot of times calling 911, listeners also need to know that there may or may not be a case that follows with it, whether it be an assault or something of that nature.
And yes, and this is just such a I don't want to call it a horrible point, but it's just one of these confounding problems that we have, is that if somebody feels like they're in danger, if somebody feels in fear, then you got to call 911. You got to call the police.
I agree.
If you feel like your life is threatened, or if you have a loved one that is just having an episode where somebody's going to get hurt, but when you do call 911, you kind of open Pandora's box, because you don't know who's going to answer that call. You don't know their outlook on things. And they may say, well, I'm not familiar with how to get a mental health warrant, but I do know how to take him to jail.
Not only that, but it's also the 911 operator that takes the call, as well as the police officer that shows up at the call. Exactly.
And there's no guarantee that there's no guarantee that that's going to end up the way that you anticipate it. But again, I've always, we have a weird dynamic too, because what will happen is the parents will come in, or family members come in, and the family sort of collectively puts their money together to hire us on a certain case. The client would be the individual who's the mentally ill one.
Correct.
And if that person has an episode at home, and I get asked this before, well, Jeremy, what do I do if he's doing this again? If he's taking the baseball bat and smashing the toilet into a million pieces, what do we do? And what do we do? Well, you call the police. I mean, there's no attorney-client privilege for something that happens in the future, and there also is none for somebody who's in danger. So that comes first, but that's just part of that awkward dynamic that a lot of times this sets up. We've got about 5 minutes left. I know you were wanting to talk about football.
Actually, that's a sore subject right now.
Oh, that's right. You're a Texas fan. Did you guys blow a 15-point lead with 3 minutes left Oh, that was the Red Raiders.
Yeah.
We did that.
Yeah. But we did do a good job in Texas OU. They came back and in the fourth overtime did not finish the game, but
I noticed.
yes.
Yeah, I saw that. Let's talk about one thing that we've left uncovered because I do think people have probably some curiosity about this. Let's talk about not guilty by reason of insanity, okay? Texas insanity law is tough. Tell the jury. I'm just used to doing that. Tell the jury what it means to be not guilty by reason of insanity.
Well, in layman's terms, it's not knowing the difference between right and wrong at the time of the offense. So someone at the time of the offense, they could go in and out of insanity. It could be something that you think they're fine, but at the time an offense was committed, whether it be a shoplift or an assault, or in my case, the woman that threw her kids off the bridge, it, as drastic as that is, it could be at that moment you did not know right from wrong. You were out of touch with reality. And you can go back to the olden days and start with the McNaughton rule and go back into the history of it. But
now that's flexing. That's to go back to. That's like my first year of law school, the McNaughton rule. Tell the jury what the McNaughton rule is.
Again, it has to do with not knowing the difference between right and wrong.
So, okay, now, and something that differentiates Texas from other jurisdictions is that in Texas, you have to have zero concept that what you're doing is wrong. I probably butchered the way that that's supposed to be done. But in other words, there are some states where if because of my insanity or whatever's going on, if I know 80%, if my mental state is 80% blocked by my insanity, other states will say that's good enough. Texas says no.
No, it's got to be that you were insane at the time.
Had zero appreciation between right and wrong.
Right.
Okay.
And so they don't just, you were a little bit insane and it's okay. Or you were a lot insane, but you kind of still knew what was going on. Still doesn't work in the state.
Right.
So, Texas wants someone to decide, wants a doctor, and as well, that's something that's litigated, because you can have one expert saying they weren't insane at the time and another expert saying they were, and that's a lot of times jury trials, and it's up to the jury, 12 members in a felony case or 6 in a misdemeanor, to determine whether they did know right from wrong.
Right. And it can be a real hard one. And I don't know, I think the case was in Collin County. We had one. And so everybody knows kind of procedurally what's going on here. And I'll take you through this case. Again, really horrific facts. This was a lady, I think it was Schlosser was her name. She actually cut her child's arms off at one point. Horrific, circumstance. I think the child died. And she had 3 psychologists who all testified this lady's as nuts as she can be. She did it because the demons and the whatever's going on in her mind. And the prosecutor couldn't find anybody. The prosecutors even went out, and this was a previous administration. The DA's office went out, and they could not find, I don't think, and this may be my recollection, I could be wrong, but I recall that they didn't have anybody who could counter that. And still the jury deadlocked. So the jury had 3 psychiatrists, mental health professionals, PhD degrees, that said this lady did not know what she was doing was right or wrong. And still the emotional part of it, that's my alarm for telling me it's time for us to wrap this up. But what was happening was that the emotional thing it's so powerful for the jury to hear such awful facts. They just wanted to hold her responsible, even though the law said, even though the law and 3 experts said, no, that's really not the case. What ultimately ended up happening is after the jury deadlocked, the judge says, "Why don't you guys just let me decide this?" And they asked the judge to decide it, and the judge says, "All right, you're incompetent, or you're not guilty by reason of insanity." And another important thing for the jury to know is that when you're found not guilty by reason of insanity, you're not done.
Right. I was gonna say you're not let go at that moment, and that's what I was saying with my client is I had her for 15 years or so because she was under the jurisdiction of the court, and they retained jurisdiction during the pendency of the statute of limitations. So, if a case
with
is
murder
life
would be life.
Yeah, and the court could maintain control or jurisdiction of that case until life, or for the life of the client.
And not only that, you're not entitled to expunction.
Correct.
You can't get it off your record. So, so even though you're technically not guilty by reason of insanity, it could certainly be lengthy incarceration in a hospital as compared to a prison, right?
Correct.
And these are probably things that jurors aren't told because we tend to say, well, juries get too confused by these things. We'll just tell them, they just flip the coin and do that, right?
That's true. And, so it's just a matter of, a lot of times it's also the limited amount of time you have to select a jury. Because sometimes if you do have more time, you can kind of get into some of that.
That's right. So if you guys want more Lawyer Show, then come by our office sometime, get to know us, be friendly with us, pay our fees, and then we'll let you hang out in the office and you can hear talk like this all day between Vanita, myself, and all the other lawyers at Rosenthal Cannabis Tarian. But this has been a pleasure today. So thank you, Vanita, for joining me on the Lawyer Show. And
thank you.
Thank you. All right.